So I think there's a lot we can learn from other countries in studying their education systems. I've been fortunate enough to get to travel and look at education systems in China, in India, in Northern Ireland, in Japan. And I haven't seen any education system that I would want to adopt whole cloth and substitute for our own. But I've seen interesting ideas from around the world that could possibly be applied here and help us improve our outcomes. A little more than a year ago, I was in Beijing for an educational exchange between some folks from the Department of Education and NSF and Department of Energy and myself, and folks from the Ministry of Education in China. I will say that they are pretty honest, at least in small session like that, about the pluses and minuses of their own education system. You may, if you remember anything from the release of the 2009 PISA results in December, the headline was, Shanghai kicks everybody's butt. Finland had been scoring at the top of the world for the previous 3 PISAs. Shanghai, for the first time, participated as though it was a nation, and it scored on some things a half to a full standard deviation above Finland. So I am not at all surprised that Shanghai did well. The Chinese have lots and lots of internal testing in their education systems, so although they haven't, they've allowed Hong Kong and Macau to participate in PISA before, but not the rest of the country. But they know how their school districts are doing in there because they have lots of ways to benchmark internally. So they know that the big school districts in their major East Coast cities, Beijing, Shanghai, Nanjing, Guangzhou, are doing very well. They're educating a lot of kids to a world-class level. And they know in the rural interior that it's a basket case. However, they're educating enough kids in those East Coast cities to take every job in America 2 times over. So this is the problem. They don't have to necessarily be the best. They just have to be good enough to do the kinds of jobs. We got to visit a high school. This is one of the top high schools in Beijing. It's called associated with Renmin University, the People's University. And I will tell you the kids I met there are not robots. They're not automatons that study all the time, although they study a lot. These kids in this school, they're all required to have some sort of artistic activity, some sort of athletic activity. So here are kids doing kung fu and girls dancing, and we saw a choir, and we saw people playing in an orchestra. And so clearly they were trying to bowl us over, right? They took us to their best, to their TJ or something. But it worked. They bowled us over. I met this young woman, Yi Chen, and she's been writing me email currently. She wants to go to college in the United States, and she'll probably get here. They took us to a very modern, brand new science museum in Beijing, where they were having a nationwide science fair, sort of like our Intel, or what was formerly known as the Westinghouse. We were there for the winners. This kid from Hong Kong won the national prize for let's see, what was his project? It was something having to do with recycling garbage to make clean energy, clean liquid fuels. So that's what he won for. This was, I don't know if anybody recognize this woman, what she looks like? Does she look like anybody familiar? This is Deng Xiaoping's daughter. This was a thrill for me. I'm something of a sinophile. if you hadn't caught on. And Deng Xiaoping, more than anybody else, is responsible for this translation in the economy. In 1979, he began to say, well, what we're going to change our economy, and we're going to have capitalism or communism with Chinese characteristics. Smells like capitalism when you're on the ground, right? They know about selling. Another famous saying of his is that it doesn't matter if a cat is black or white as long as it catches mice. Let's not worry about the ideology of our economy. Let's focus on if it performs. Yes, sir.
Was he the one who said to be rich is glorious?
Yes, to be rich is glorious. Yep. And people have bought into that, I'll tell you. So it was a thrill for me to see her there. Not a thrill just for me. The kids flocked around her. Everybody wanted pictures with her. So what's happening right now? Is there anything? I have been working to depress you. I'm going to try and leave you on a little bit of a high. I think there are some reasons to believe that we are beginning to wake up and take things more seriously than we ever had. The most important, exciting thing to me right now is something called the Common Core State Standards. So for the past 20 years, we've had state standards. Each state sets its own standards, creates the test to determine whether kids are meeting that standard, sets the passing score, and then reports out. What a bunch of the governors did, 48 governors got together and agreed that they would work on Common Core state standards in reading, and mathematics. So right now, let's see, so 48 states agreed to participate in the draft. What two states stayed out? It's a quiz. Texas, yep, of course. And no, not Florida. Alaska. So what they're doing, they have come up with what they call college and career readiness standards. So in reading and mathematics, they're trying to define what kids should know at the end of 13 years of education, K through 12, that will allow them to choose to either go to college or to enter a trade or some other kind of career, so that they're ready for either one of these things. And hopefully, we're going to get science standards in the next couple of years. I've been on a panel at the National Academy that's begun to put together discussion drafts of these science standards for the National Governors Association to look at and consider. Currently, 44 states have adopted the two standards, the English language arts and the math, or maybe 43 and a half. Minnesota adopted the English language arts standards and said they thought their own math standards were better. If most states said that, I would laugh. If Massachusetts or Minnesota says that, I'll grant they're okay. So this is a remarkable flip in the terms of sort of where the power is going to be, where the market power is going to be to create instructional materials, teacher training, support. Today we have a system in which Texas and Florida and New York maybe drive the market, mostly Texas and Florida, because these are adoption states, so the school board has to approve a text for it to be purchased. They have very, very specific RFPs, long lists of you shall not. And so when I've gone to dinner with textbook publishers, they will say that they mostly look at the RFP from Texas and maybe Florida, maybe California or New York. They try and create something that'll work in all those settings, all those environments, and that's what everybody else gets. No matter what their standards say, no matter what their standards are geared to look at. Now we're going to have a situation where 44 of our states have agreed to work on the same set of standards. So I think we can look forward to, or at least have the hope of looking forward to, much better designed instructional materials for teachers, much better textbooks. You know, the textbook bloat that our young kids have, they're carrying home these giant biology books and chemistry books. That's because the textbook manufacturers are trying to satisfy standards from all over the place that are conflicting. And so they just put in all these little things so that any adoption committee that looks at it will be able to go check, check, check. And it's a monstrosity. It's not well thought through. I think we can look forward to a new generation of better materials, better professional development and support for teachers. I'm going to tell you just a bit about what NIH is doing. Everything that we have to offer to teachers or students or the public in terms of science education resources, you can find on my office's website, science.education.nih.gov. We've got about 2,000 NIH resources tagged according to the top questions that we get from teachers. That is a topic question. You know, I need something on cell biology, I need something on genetics, or grade level or resource format. We have two major programs, things that we're creating for teachers. We have a curriculum supplement series. These are kind of our premier products. Each one is designed to be 2 weeks worth of lesson plans. And more important, it's science the way we think science ought to be taught. We think science ought to be taught by acting kids to act like scientists. Give them data, put them on problem-solving teams, ask them to solve problems. So the classical thing with one of our curriculum supplements is that kids are given a problem. A patient has died after working in a barn. Let's figure out what happened. And so we'll have a team of epidemiologists. We'll have a team of ER docs. We have a team of lab techs. Each is given a set of data. No one team has all the data they need to solve the problem by themselves. So once they figure that out, they have to start to communicate. And this is very much how science gets done today.
Is this curriculum just biology?
Biology and some chemistry. There's some in there that would touch on math even, but it's primarily a biological context. We've created something we call LifeWorks, which is a career exploration site for middle and high school students. We now have 150 different careers in health and medicine profiled. And the fun thing here is it's not just doctor, nurse, scientists, but we have medical artists, librarians, bioinformatic specialists, bioengineers, bioimaging, lots of different things, forensic technicians profiled. So kids can understand how broad the career is. We actually ask all of our profiled people to answer the same 5 questions. The most popular question for middle and high school students is, what do you do all day long? Right? When you're in school, it's hard to imagine that you're going to be doing something 40 hours plus a week for the rest of your life. And so, you know, when I tell kids, well, I mostly answer emails. Can't believe it. So this curriculum supplement series we only have one unit that targets elementary, unfortunately. And then we have 8 units that target middle school, 7 at high school, and we've got several new ones coming. We're distributing them all over the United States. This is a little map that I made. I've put a blue dot in each zip code to which we have delivered one or more of our curriculum supplements over the years. The Office of Management and Budget asked me this question: were we distributing fairly across the country, or was it a regional distribution? This slide is a picture of the United States at night from a NOAA satellite showing lights where people live. So if I can toggle back and forth, you can see we're doing a pretty good job of getting things to where people live. You can pick out I-80, I-70 just by the dots on our map. We got 2 new curriculum supplements that are about to go to the printer. A high school unit on evolution and medicine, middle school unit on rare diseases and scientific inquiry. Some of you may recognize this kind of traditional story. When you hear hoofbeats, don't think zebras, right? Well, in rare diseases, sometimes it's a zebra. Here's LifeWorks. Here's my associate, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
In the U.S., we have a large population of people who are very anti-intellectual. Are other countries fighting with the same type of willful, blind ignorance?
Well, I would say it's not that clear. I mean, in general, here in the United States, the surveys that look at public support for science actually have us leading Europe in terms of the extent to which people believe science is making their life better. Science is going to find new answers. There's more skepticism in Europe. But you're very right. In some areas, there are subgroups of people who are very suspicious of science. There are people like that who fall on our political left and our political right. They don't necessarily agree. They're suspicious for different reasons and different parts of science. So I think, one of the things we're trying to do at NIH and other government agencies to address this is we have begun creating and supporting development of public science education programs. So you'll remember last fall we had the first USA Science and Engineering Fair on the Mall. Terrific success. The next one's going to be in April of 2012. Larry Bach, the organizer, is going to try and get satellite conventions going on all over the country. We, in the summertime, I'll be glad to share this schedule with this group because some of you might be interested. For the past 17 or 18 years now, we've had a summer science festival called Science in the Cinema. We run it at the AFI Silver over in Silver Spring. We will show a film that has a science or medical theme, and then we invite in a guest expert to talk for a few minutes about was it portrayed accurately, was this disease portrayed accurately, and then simply answer questions from the public. The first year I tried that, which is the first year I came here to NIH, I really didn't know if we'd find an audience for a program like that. But we have. We get about 350, 400 people on an average night turnout. Some are there just for a free movie, but most stay to listen to the discussion. And the speakers I find are routinely surprised by the quality of the questions they're getting.
Is that just in this area, you said?
We've helped some other groups in San Diego and in Ohio and Louisiana set up their own programs.
But in this area, it's a given that people would attend those.
Yeah, but the ones that the ones that have been run in Ohio and San Diego and some other places have done pretty well. So you're looking at a subset of individuals. This isn't everybody, but I think we sometimes underestimate how much the public will turn out to learn about science if it's presented in a friendly, non-intimidating way.
I have a conjecture and then a puzzle that comes from that. I have often argued that the falling credentials of people who go into K through 12 teaching is a primary problem for our country, and that it's at least in part, or maybe large part, caused by the women's movement, for which I'm proud to say that I'm a cause of that. That I'm somebody who made that happen.
Me too.
Good. And should be all of us. But anyway, if this is true, that the falling credentials of K through 12 teachers is at least in part due to the women's movement. What's the story in the rest of the world? How do they maintain the qualifications of K through 12 teachers when we have not been able to do that?
That's a very insightful question. It's something that those of us who think about this issue talk about a lot. And I think, at least in part, I don't know what percentage of the problem is attributable to the trend that you described, but I think a large part of it is certainly that. If we look back at the women who were my teachers in elementary and middle and high school, or I had some men in high school, those women had very few career choices. You know, they were largely, they could do nursing, they could do teaching, and so you would get the full distribution of people. And those women today can be CEOs or engineers or lawyers or anything they want to do. So in terms of data that I have, I would say that there are some countries, like Finland, which tend to draw their teacher corps from the top 20% of their academic distribution. If you look in the United States, in virtually any university that has a school of education, the School of Education has the lowest entering SAT scores. And so most of our teachers are drawn from the bottom 20% of or bottom 25% of our academic distribution. Is that part of the problem? I think it absolutely is. In terms of solving it, I'll just point out what the Finns did, because it was not ever thus in Finland. They actually decided to make it hard to become a teacher. So they reduced the number of slots in their schools of education. It's very, very hard to get into a school of education in Finland. They admit less than one applicant in 10. So, and when you do get in, then everything's free, right? Because it's so important to the society. So it's still not a way to get rich, right? You'd be better off becoming a CEO, but it has a lot of social capital now that it never had before. So when your child gets into ed school, that means they're the cream of the crop. It's like medical school here. So it really has helped. And you know, if you look in some of the Asian societies, again, it's not a way to get rich, but teaching carries a lot of social capital and respect with it. Okay, in the very back, and then you.
And so is this data being kind of corrected for the subsets, such as developmental issues or learning disabilities, or even more importantly, sort of the ESL population, which is huge?
Right. No, it hasn't been corrected for ESL, certainly, and special needs. What they do is, in every country, they sample the entire distribution of their educational system in proportion to in proportion to the representation in the overall population. So, for example, in the United States, we have what is called a non-selective school system. So everybody goes into the school system and they stay there. There's really no, despite all the complaining about testing, there's really no high-stakes test for the student until the SAT. That's not true of other school systems around the world. The Chinese have a fifth grade exam called Zhongkao that can eliminate you from college in the fifth grade. And then they have another one, Gaokao, in high school that determines who will go to university and what level of university you'll go to. It almost shuts down the nation for 2 days. They reroute planes around the test sites. They block off streets so everybody can focus and concentrate. It would be a crazy system, and when I was in Northern Ireland, they have the remnants of that from their UK system. They have a 10+ exam that they're trying to get rid of, but it's so inculcated into everything. It's crazy for a developed country like Northern Ireland. In China, maybe it makes sense because You know, the argument against is if you're a late bloomer, too bad. You know, if you come to fruition in 6th grade, it's too late. You're going to be a laborer. But any system they come up with in China right now is going to waste a lot of human capital. Because for the next 50 years, only a tiny percentage of kids are going to be able to go and get a university education. So they're just concerned that the kids who do get in are really at the top. So, so in the Chinese system, PISA will sample from the full distribution. The kids who've done well on the Zhengkao, the kids who've done poorly, the kids who are on the vocational track, the kids who are on the top track. Everybody's sampled in proportion. And what PISA does is they actually get a list of all the schools that are going to participate in the exam, and then they pick the school and they pick the students within the school. So it's a random sample. So, so it's a pretty fair test. They work pretty hard to do a full randomized sample within a country. Occasionally, a country gets kicked out because something looks bad. They seem to have excluded too many of the kids, or too many of those kids don't show up on that day. In 2003, I believe it was, that the United Kingdom got excluded. It was a national scandal. So I can't promise you that the results are fair, that nobody hasn't figured out a way to game it. But it's a pretty fair test. I think it's the best estimate, best comparison of how we have of really the effectiveness of our relative school systems. Another problem that comes up a lot is poverty. So poverty's tough because every country has a different definition of what poverty is. I think our definition includes about 10 to 12% of our population. China claims that their level of poverty is about 2.1%. So much smaller than ours. Their definition of poverty, though, is someone who lives on less than $90 a year. So I'll tell you that a more realistic definition of being poor and struggling in China is they have about 400 million people who live on $1 to $2 a day. And that's, you can do it, but it's really tough. And so there we are.
I wanted to answer her question in part about why many people just don't want to be teachers. Just a few observations. One observation is that we still educate kids, and let's just say in the county are still responsible for primary education, so to speak. So the teacher's pay comes out of the county budget. If you're in Fairfax County, that's a great thing because Fairfax is a pretty wealthy county. However, if you're county, say Appalachian Mountains of Virginia, that's not such a great thing. So they cannot afford to pay for a top level teacher. That's one observation. Second observation. Let's assume they actually do get a top level education, top level teacher. The teacher decides to teach something that the parent doesn't like. It's not a hypothetical situation. Right. It's actually happened in Kansas. Yeah. The story goes that a child basically asked the teacher about evolution and about creationism. The story goes, the teacher basically said that creation was a bunch of junk. Well, the kid went through her parents, and the parents went to the school, and that teacher got fired. Yeah. So there's another one. So I just want to make two observations there. Okay, I'll end it there. But those are just.
I think you're very right. There is great maldistribution in how we fund our school system. There's more variability in how our schools are funded than in virtually any other nation in the world. So even though we're spending more, it's not evenly distributed. Okay, here and then to you.
You kind of answered it, I think. I was going to ask how decentralized, we are pretty decentralized with our education system here. How does that compare to other countries? I mean, I guess China's not as, it could be actually decentralized there because of such a huge, and education does go back there historically, further back in areas where probably not as tied together, but are they more centralized now than they have been?
You know, that's a great question. as I've gotten to know more and more about the Chinese education system, I'm surprised at the amount of decentralization and market competition, frankly, that there is in the system. So in terms of setting the standards, the standards are set centrally at a national level through the Ministry of Education. So they come up with standards for what kids ought to know about reading, history, chemistry, biology, physics, so forth. In terms of what materials teachers use, what books, what textbooks are selected, that's done at a district level. So there's a lot of variability, and there's a huge, very competitive marketplace that's trying to meet that need, and it's become very differentiated. So there are companies that are creating materials for really high-performing students in very competitive school districts. There are other companies that are specializing on sort of lower-level materials for the kids in the rural areas who are not as advanced. And then, these exams that I talked about, the Zhongkao, the Gaokao, there's a fair amount of corruption in Chinese society, but these exams are tolerated because the people believe they're fair. So, if you're a smart, hardworking kid from a poor district, and you do very well on the Gaokao, you're going to go to a top university. And there's lots of parts of Chinese society that don't work that way, and so the tests are accepted by the population there.
Yeah. The rise of China and decline of the West is one of the things I study, so I'd like to offer a few comments. I think it's a great thing to use the fear of the rise of China to promote science education. I'm all in favor of the utilitarian purpose you put it to. On the other side, it is a nationalistic appeal, and that is unscientific, the opposite of scientific, first. Second, I think the Goldman Sachs projection is very unscientific. Between them and Gordon Chang, who projects the collapse of China, I would say they're both very implausible, but Gordon Chang is slightly less implausible to come true. And there's a couple other points to be made there. The Goldman Sachs assumes about a 7-point spread in GDP growth rates between China's and ours. A 2% change in ours by more science education is not going to change their fundamental projection.
Right.
It's going to make a difference at the margins, 1 decade difference.
Right.
That's about it. That's on the one side. So there's an element of barking up the wrong tree here. I don't mind the utilitarian purpose, but I do think it's diluting. On the other side, China is one country. The United States is one country, but it might be the wrong thing to compare to. If you say, will China surpass the West, or the modern democratic world, the answer is we have as many people as China does. They'll never surpass us. Nothing to worry about as long as the modern democratic world holds together and doesn't divide up on a nationalistic basis. And in that sense, the nationalistic appeal can be self-defeating and suicidal. It can also lead to self-fulfilling prophecies. If we expect inevitably China will surpass us, and as a separate nation, China will inevitably surpass us in aggregate GDP, then the only thing is for everyone to adapt to the future China-dominated world, and the West will divide up. So it becomes self-fulfilling in a much more direct sense as well. So I think there are some fundamentally wrong assumptions on the political level here, and where that leads, I have no objection to the utilitarian use of it for promoting scientific education.
Great, thank you. I agree with almost everything you said. China, I'm sorry I pulled out a slide that talks about the things that could impede China's rise. They have a great deal of things that could go wrong. They have this pool of 400 million or so people who are not seeing much benefit from the rise of China as a whole, while over the last 20 years the average Chinese has seen a quadrupling in their standard of living. Many of the rural farmers are being left behind, and that's sowing a lot of social tension. So every year, enough Chinese peasant farmers walk out of the countryside and into one of the major cities to fill a New York City every year. and those people come in, they're prejudiced, they're biased against by the local governments. Their children are not supposed to go to the local schools. They're supposed to go to school back where they came from. The people are may or may not be discriminated against in jobs. Now, again, there's a lot of corruption. So if you got some money, you can get your kid in the local school. But I agree with you. The scenario that posits the rise of China is not an inevitable one. Lots of things could knock it off that path. I, for one, don't fear it. I've got a lot of reasons to love China. China gave me the most important thing in my life. And I have come to love the Chinese people. I've been there a lot, and I love their spirit. I love their work ethic. They have a Protestant work ethic, even though you can't find a Protestant. So there's a lot to love about China. The government I'm not thrilled about, but I hope, I hope as things advance, there will be pressure for a more open and democratic society too. It may not work that way, but I'm an optimist.
I was wondering if you have any thoughts about the movement towards home education and how that has impacted our educational system, and whether there's enough data to assess how that impacts those numbers that you've given us.
So my boss, I work for Francis Collins, who was the head of the Human Genome Project, and he's now the NIH director, was homeschooled, at least through part of middle school. So he turned out okay. Our curriculum supplements that we give out, we get lots of requests from homeschools. Said, are we considered teachers? We do consider them teachers. Now, I would also say I did a little internal study at one point, and I tried to find the number of curriculum supplements that we were sending to homeschools, and it turned out to be about 6% of our distribution over the time that I looked, that were identifiable as homeschools. And that's quite a bit more than the number of kids who are homeschooled. So I think homeschools find our materials popular. They're free. I'm sure that's part of it. I don't know what they do with all the evolution that's in there. I mean, some people who are being homeschooled for religious reasons so that their kids can avoid evolution, I don't know what those people do with the evolution that's in our units, and our evolution in medicine unit may not be very popular with that crowd because it's right in the title. But I think folks can do a good job homeschooling. By and large, the kids who come out of homeschools do okay when they reintegrate into high school or at the college level. I don't think it's going to be a solution for our education problems as a nation. I don't think too many people want to take that task on.
Okay, according to my observation, because I was a little teacher, a substitute teacher, why the big problem in America that the system doesn't have goal educate. The system, public system, doesn't educate the student. They're rather keeping them together. And for this another reason. And second is if they don't change politicians, that we have to keep discipline somewhat organized and go to educate a student, they will be problem. But if they change the attitude and try to educate and keep in discipline, they will be blooming in America, because after my experience, they are very talented here in America, the student. Any level, they are talented, they want to do, but they are not able with this system of goal and situation of discipline.
That's not the first time I've heard that complaint, that we're, especially in our current system, we're more focused on the acquisition of facts that can be easily measured than we are with educating a person broadly to do well in life or do well in things that they're interested in. I think there's some truth to that. I have some hope that the Common Core standards will help that. They're set at a higher level. The folks who put them together purposely benchmark themselves against the best systems around the world, and yet there are fewer standards to achieve. So I think one of the complaints about U.S. standards throughout the 1990s were that they were a mile wide and an inch deep. We taught more topics in less depth than any other nation in the world. So if we can cut that down so that kids have time to master things, I think we'll be doing better. I want to answer one last thing that's sort of related to that nobody asked, which is, why do we do so well? What do we do well in this country? So although we're not doing very well at the end of high school, our kids are not very competitive, we still have one of the best university systems in the world. So those kids who go on to university 4 years later or 5 years later emerge with a lot of skills that are marketable and can do very well. This has contributed to our income dispersion, where kids with higher level college skills are doing better and better in our economy, where everybody else is sort of stagnating or doing worse. It's very interesting when we get in these meetings, like with my colleagues at the Ministry of Education in China. You know what they want to know from us? A couple of things. They want to know what's our cure for video game addiction. Rebecca's been very good for 90 minutes, but then she's going to get cut off here. And they want to know, how do we create kids who are so creative? And they want to know about our community college system. So these are some things that I think we do well. We don't have a cure for video game addiction, number one. But the other things, it's me, yeah. There's a cure in my house. There's the interest in community colleges is something we do very well in this country, and we don't want to lose it. So we do second chances well. In China, once you fall off that path, it's very hard to get back into the system, to get a second chance. In business, in school, it's just hard. And we do that very, very well. Who here in this room knows the name of Bill Gates' first company? Nobody, right? It was called Trafo Data. He started it in middle school with a friend of his, and it wasn't that good an idea, and it went out of business. He started another company later, Microsoft, which was a little bit better idea, and it did okay. But in China, he wouldn't have gotten a chance. If you fail once at business, you're done. You're tainted. You're marked somehow. So the creative thing is very interesting. I do think there are aspects of the U.S. education system and the Chinese education that reinforce that creativity in the U.S. students and tend to squelch it in the Chinese. But I think it's broader than just the education system. I think it's also cultural. So if you look at the tradition of Confucianism, it really was about mastering a body of facts so that you could become a civil servant. They weren't rewarded for being creative. We had a high school student who was an exchange student with us for a year, about 7 years ago. And when she first came in, we were discussing education because her mom is a associate superintendent for the Nanjing School District. And she said, well, to get full marks in China, I must recite the correct answer. And I thought that was just an odd word choice. I later came to understand Jessie had wonderful English. She has a huge vocabulary. That was exactly the word she was using. I have to say the same words in the same order if I'm going to, as the professor, to get full marks. And So I saw in this Renmin University, the top students in Beijing. There was a professor from a university lecturing on biotechnology and genetics, and I was in there. Don't speak a lot of Chinese, but I could follow it. And I had the little girl who was with me translate all the questions, because what I really wanted to know were the questions that the students asked. They were inane. They were pointless, nothing challenging, nothing edgy, nothing pushing. So it's part of the culture there, not to challenge superiors. So this is something we do well. It's something we need to hang on to, even as we try and repair other things that we're not doing so well at. So thank you all very much. If I could keep you for one more second, Rebecca, tell everybody thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming to Rebecca's and Bruce's show.